Live. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? All right, I thought I'd jump right in there and start off with the usual greeting. It's Tuesday, September 28th, 2021. My phone, the photos specifically on my phone are insisting that it's 2014, or at least that I see the memories of 2014. Must have been a weekend. What a much better day, I bet that was. Then, okay, it's a weekday, no one wants to get up and out of bed, etc., etc. It's Tuesday. It's as good a day as any to catch up on what they intend to do in Congress this week, except nobody knows. And, of course, this week, I believe this is the last week of Joan's vacation, well earned, and so she doesn't have to tell us what's going on in Congress. And I don't know if anybody knows. I think we can cover at this point and make a decent guess, which is to say, the intention is, up until last night anyway, I don't know whether this has changed anything, but last night's developments may have changed things. Yesterday's news was that they intended to, of course, the original intention was to bring the infrastructure bill to a vote yesterday. Yesterday was the deadline that was set by the terms of the sort of kind of deal, but, of course, that deal appears to be falling apart piece by piece anyway, but I guess it was acceptable even to the more conservative Democrats who wanted the infrastructure bill part of this thing voted on by December 27th or September 27th or else. They were okay with pushing it to Thursday, and that's where things stood until yesterday evening. And then, as I understand it, there was a caucus meeting last night, touted in the reporting as a rare Monday caucus meeting. Rare because they're usually not in town on Monday. But okay, they had a caucus meeting, and it sounds like, according to Politico, and you never know whether Politico is, they're always telling you what you heard. I don't think they make things up out of whole cloth usually, but it may be their spin more than the reality. But the story they were running with last night was Pelosi steers Dems toward infrastructure vote without spending bill in tow. And this was news that they were, they thought people should read it as a delinking by Nancy Pelosi of the two bills. We will read into this and see what we think and see what kind of commentary comes in about this, because the Kagro in the Morning radio show is live now. It is, some help from Bill. It is National Voter Registration Day. Is that right? Great. Hey, everybody. I knew that. Sounds like something I should probably have known. I was thinking last night I should look up whether it's a national day or something, because we don't really have that much to add to things here. Let's see. But it's National Voter Registration Day. That seems interesting. And KagroX, that's me, David Waldman, says, what the hell do I say? You better get registered, so help me. Just don't test me, right? Okay, I mean it. All right, don't make me come back there. Don't make me turn this democracy around. All right, well, you get the idea. I would be shocked if listeners to this program weren't registered, unless they had moved into a new state and were just waiting, for whatever reason, to register later today. So if you were saving it for National Voter Registration Day, now's the time. Wait until after the show, or listen to the podcast later, I guess. Listen if you're waiting in line, if you're in one of those places where you have to wait a long time to register to vote. And you'll hear me read you this Politico piece and try and figure out what it means. Pelosi steers Dems toward infrastructure vote without spending bill in tow. Subheader. She signaled to her caucus she was no longer planning to pass both the party line social spending bill, reconciliation, and infrastructure at the same time. And they were never going to be literally at the same time, obviously, but they were supposed to be in tandem. Who's reporting? If that helps you evaluate the veracity, so that you could determine the veracity of their arguments, Heather Kagro and Sarah Ferris get the byline for this piece. Speaker Nancy Pelosi is reversing a months-long vow to push through the two major planks of Democrats' agenda, domestic agenda, in tandem, a huge shift. Remember when we always used to say huge because that's the way that the former guy used to say it? He stopped using huge. I noticed. I don't know whether he was sensitive about that, being teased about saying huge, but, well, anyway, belated observation. A huge shift just days before a critical infrastructure vote. Pelosi explained her thinking in a rare, Monday night caucus session, saying she and President Joe Biden are continuing to push the Senate on negotiations related to the social spending package, but the House must move ahead on infrastructure this week before surface transportation funding expires on Thursday. That's another of the deadlines hanging out there. Authorization for surface transportation spending, I guess, or for whatever reason, hanging out there. It is an authorization, I think, right? Moose ahead, because I don't think it would matter so much if they passed the. Yeah, I'm not certain exactly why it would matter that much, except unless it was the authorization, and then they were spending unauthorized funds with an appropriations bill. The Speaker had declared earlier this summer that the House would only pass Biden's bipartisan infrastructure bill if both chambers had also agreed to the party's broader social spending plan. The California Democrat privately told members that the thinking began to change 10 days ago when she learned that Democrats would need to scale back the initial $3.5 trillion price tag for that spending bill, a massive legislative task. It all changed, so our approach had to change, Pelosi told her caucus Monday, according to Democrats present. We had to accommodate the changes that were being necessitated, and we cannot be ready to say, she added, until the Senate passed the bill, we can't do infrastructure. The California Democrats said Biden and Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer continue to push Senate moderates, if that's the word for them, to agree to a top-line spending target, saying spending bill action in her chamber is effectively frozen until that happens. We are not going to pass a bill that won't pass the Senate, and that's why we have to come up with a number, Pelosi told Democrats, but we're not there yet. Even as Pelosi attempted to rally her caucus around the new plan, the senator who would be key to any deal showed no movement. And here's the quote from Joe Manchin. It would be a shame if anyone took credit for sinking an infrastructure bill this country needs. And I don't think anybody's going to be doing that. Adding that those warnings would not affect him. I don't do really good on threats. Of course, he doesn't really do any good ever on anything. And he's a foot dragger by nature. And it doesn't really matter. Threaten him, cajole him, sweet talk him. Nothing matters to him, so it doesn't really matter, but okay, fine. You don't do good on threats. That's fine, because there ain't any. Now what do you have to say for yourself? Still same nothing. Okay, great. House Democratic Caucus Chair Hakeem Jeffries said Democratic leaders would continue to try to push the Senate on the broader bill this week while moving ahead on the infrastructure vote. I guess the big problem here is they say, well, we can't really do anything, and we can't even pass the infrastructure bill unless we're sure that the Senate is also going to pass this same bill, because we're not going to go through this back and forth thing and only be told to, take votes on a big spending package for infrastructure, only to be told, oh yeah, in the end, we're only going to pass this little thing anyway. But now you're on record as voting for this much bigger one, and then contradicting yourself, voting for this smaller one. That's not really helpful. Just tell us what you'll pass, and we'll pass that too. But the thing is, the Senate won't say. So it's a little difficult. What's holding everything up are a few senators who aren't providing us with any clarity as to where they ultimately will land, Jeffries said. That's the issue in front of us right now, and we have to try to resolve it in the next few days. Still, Democrats have not started to whip the infrastructure vote, and some progressives signaled Monday night that they wouldn't go along with the plan. Now, I guess this is a test to see whether or not the bulk of the Progressive Caucus, which may or may not have threatened to, in fact, refuse to vote in favor of the infrastructure bill unless there was either already passage of or some guarantee of the passage of the reconciliation bill. And some of them will waver and say, if it really looks like it's this or nothing, we might take this. But there are others who say, it's only nothing if you force it to be nothing, and we're only here to fulfill our promise. We said there really needs to be something in it for us too, in order for us to give you what you want, and we're not getting our part, so you're not getting your part, and that's kind of how these deals work. And if it's nothing, it's on you. We'll see which wing of the Progressive Caucus prevails here and how it works out. We'll get a chance to see. Still, it says Democrats had not started to whip, right, on the infrastructure vote. Some progressives said they wouldn't vote for the plan. Here's one. Absolutely not. A deal is a deal. We are not passing anything short of having the full Build Back Better agenda, said Representative Ilhan Omar of Minnesota, when asked if progressives would be willing to advance the infrastructure bill even as the broader bill remained unfinished. That's her answer, and she probably speaks for a few other people, whether or not it's the numbers necessary to, in fact, hold out, and that nothing will pass unless the full Build Back Better agenda goes along with it. She may find herself outnumbered even in the Progressive Caucus, but we have yet to find out. Sources close to Pelosi say the speaker was left without a choice given the looming expiration date for highway and transit programs and the resistance from Senate moderates to publicly commit to overall funding or program guarantees within the broader spending package. Okay. So here it makes it a little less clear exactly what the expiration date is. It may be, though, that it could be the close of the fiscal year and existing fiscal year appropriations for infrastructure projects, whatever they may be, runs out along with funding for the rest of the government. Although now I guess they've got a CR that covers at least some of that stuff, as I understand it. But that highway funding, I guess, expires unless there's new funding, because it doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. It's one thing for them to lose the authorization, but then again, there's no authorization language coming down the pike anytime soon either. So it's not like that could be the issue. It would have to be a funding issue. And it's also not like it's really a problem to appropriate funds that haven't been previously authorized. It's a point of order you can raise during consideration of the bill that can screw things up. And that may be an issue. I don't think I've seen anybody talking about that. But usually if you go ahead and appropriate the dollars, even if it hasn't been authorized ahead of time, if the bill passes and the money's there. So that's not entirely clear to me how big of a problem that really is. But, it's a helpful device, so they're using it. The closed-door session Monday marked the first time the Democratic caucus sat down since Pelosi announced that the House would vote Thursday, as opposed to yesterday, on Biden's infrastructure package. The Speaker also declared over the weekend that the House would vote this week on Democrats' sprawling domestic policy bill. It says an aim so loft. My guess is lofty, that few Democrats believe it is possible in the coming days. Okay. I guess not. Instead, Pelosi and key members of her caucus are focused on reaching a public agreement with key senators on the total cost of the social spending plan, as well as other major aspects, but it's unclear exactly how many specifics Democrats will secure from Manchin and Senator Kyrsten Sinema, the Senate's most vocal centrists. They're not centrists, and Sinema's anything but vocal. She won't tell anybody anything. In time for their Thursday vote, according to people close to their thinking, and I'm not certain that's what it is either, which Democrats believe has essentially forced their party to de-link the two bills. Except, by the way, all the discussion of how they need to be de-linked is linking them. So, I'm not certain how effective that really is. House Majority Leader Steny Hoyer confirmed after the meeting that the infrastructure vote would happen Thursday. We'll see. There is an absolute consensus we need to pass these two bills, period. That doesn't answer the question. In the push to reach, it's a great statement, though, by the way. In the push to reach a bicameral accord, Sinema has been in close contact with a small group of House moderates, including Josh Gottheimer and, next sentence here. Pramila Jayapal, who's, I think, the chair of the Progressive Caucus. I was confused to see her named right after Gottheimer, but there's a period in there separating the two sentences. I thought, oh, is Pramila Jayapal the second of at least three listed House moderates? That's interesting. No. Josh Gottheimer is listed as the moderate. Pramila Jayapal has also, though, who is, the progressives, have also been in touch with some of those moderates, including Sinema. So that's interesting, talking across the other side of the building there. Dynamics within the caucus remain deeply strained, with progressives publicly vowing to oppose the Senate's bipartisan public works bill without passage of the social package, and moderates threatening to tank those party line talks without an infrastructure vote this week. Some moderates who had demanded the infrastructure vote this week privately emerged from the meeting feeling like they had secured a win over the left faction of their caucus. Congratulations on winning against Democrats. Good job. In the Democratic meeting Monday, moderate Stephanie Murphy of Florida told her colleagues to stop using the word leverage. Everyone wants people to stop using certain words. Delaying the bill isn't going to make us any more or less likely to support reconciliation, she said. I am a legislator, not a lemming. All right, whatever. That doesn't really mean much to me. Even as progressives and centrists remained publicly intractable Monday, both sides had been slowly starting to concede in private that they will have to give some ground in order to ensure Biden's domestic agenda stays afloat. Publicly, though, Jayapal, chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, was still insisting as of Monday afternoon that progressives wanted to see the sprawling spending plan passed in both the House and the Senate before the caucus will support the infrastructure vote. What we have said is we need the entire reconciliation bill, Jayapal told reporters. Some framework that can still take another couple months to get done, that the Senate hasn't agreed to, that hasn't been voted on, that's not going to do it for us. Jayapal's thinking has not changed, or had not changed, after Pelosi's shift to decouple the two spending bills. We're going to vote for both bills after the reconciliation bill is done, she said after the caucus meeting. Jayapal also downplayed the surface transportation date, saying the program's authorization, here we are, some explanation. Thank you, progressives. The program's authorization has expired many times in the past. It is authorization, okay? But nothing happens as long as we keep the appropriations going. All right, so I think that basically explains what's expiring, and B, pretty much what I said before. They don't really care whether there's authorization or not, ultimately. The list of lingering questions about Biden's broader package remains long. That's something. What a sentence. Something about blah, 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 broader package remaining long. Okay. List of lingering questions. Yes. Okay. Both Pelosi and Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer are still wrangling their members about what they're willing to support on both the scope and substance of the legislation. Democrats are split over the price tag of the bill, currently at $3.5 trillion, as well as huge questions about government drug price negotiations and expanding Medicare and Medicaid. I think we're going to do everything Nancy Pelosi said we're going to do. That's usually the way things turn out. He's right about that. Said Representative Emanuel Cleaver, who's been around long enough to know. It's not pretty. It's not going to be easy. But what I know is there's not a single Democrat who will walk into that room who's interested in sacking our quarterback. Now, that's true, because the Senate guys stayed on the other side. Pelosi and Schumer spoke to Biden via phone before the House caucus meeting on Monday evening. Several senior Democrats are also hoping Biden will more forcefully weigh in on the infrastructure vote on Thursday, publicly declaring that the bill needs to be passed by the House on that day. So far, the president has not done so directly, instead speaking about the overall urgency of his agenda during a brief interaction with reporters on Monday. Without specifying a deadline, he said, we've got three things to do. The debt ceiling, yes. The continuing resolution, yes. And the 2 pieces of legislation. It's 4 things. If we do that, the country is going to be in great shape. Now, it is 4 bills, but there's some indication anyway, rhetorically, in terms of telling you where Biden's head is on the linkage of the 2 bills. He says we've got 3 things to do: the debt ceiling, continuing resolution, and the 2 pieces of legislation as one unit. That's pretty interesting. Pelosi teed up the infrastructure vote on Thursday for 2 reasons. The first is to exert maximum pressure on members to vote yes, given the expiration of key surface transportation funding that day. Senior Democrats on both sides of the Capitol are hoping to secure that official framework for that policy bill that would have buy-in from Senate moderates, ideally enough of a commitment to convince liberals in the House to back down on their threat and support the infrastructure bill. All right. By the way, the reason it was moved to Thursday, the reason they picked Thursday, I guess, is to link it with the expiration of previous authorization. However weak that linkage really is. But the reason they moved it at all is they couldn't put the votes together on Monday. They said they wanted to do it on the 27th, and Pelosi's whip count showed that it must have showed her that to this point, the progressives still appeared to be able to at least threaten to sink the thing. So she didn't want to have that vote on Monday and ruin the whole week. You can always bring the thing back for reconsideration, sure, but she doesn't like to do that. So she pushed it to Thursday. It might be that it's linking it with the authorization expiration. It may also just be Thursday's the last day I expect us to be here in the week. We're usually out of here on Friday. Friday's no good to us anyway as a deadline. As it happens, the 2 factors. 1, Thursday being the last day we're usually here. We sometimes work on Friday. That's not an absolute deadline. But the fact that Thursday also happens to be the end of the month, such that Friday would be working after the deadline had passed, might as well nail it on Thursday. When are they most often expected to be in session on Friday on any given time of the year? If they're in on a Friday, then it's most likely because it's right around the end of the fiscal year, and they're either trying to pass a CR or finish up the budget proper, which hasn't happened in 100 years or whatever, before the end of the fiscal year, or they're in on Friday because it looks like, oops, we're going to fail, and the government technically will shut down at midnight on Thursday night, but we're going to stay in on Friday and try Friday morning to reopen it. So it's a pretty good bet that they may end up hanging around on Friday after all, but they're hoping to get out of here Thursday. Where were we here? Yes. Pelosi teed up the vote on Thursday, right. Senior Democrats on both sides of the Capitol are hoping to secure that official framework for that policy bill, reconciliation, that would have buy-in from Senate moderates, right? Ideally so much enough that it would convince liberals in the House to back down on their threat to and just say, all right, we'll support the infrastructure bill because it looks so promising for reconciliation in the Senate. That's the ideal. Progressives say that framework must lay out precise details on what the Senate centrists are willing to support on everything from Medicare expansion to climate provisions. If not, they won't vote for the infrastructure bill. That's supposed to be the deal. Democrats are gearing up for an intense few days as Pelosi and her leadership team attempt to lock down the votes on Thursday. The temperature will never go down. People are passionate. The heat won't go down until this is over, Representative Greg Meeks said, leaving Monday night's meeting, adding that the speaker took meticulous notes from each speaker. That is, the capital S speaker took meticulous notes from each lowercase s speaker, each person who spoke at the caucus meeting. That's nice. She's listening to everybody. Okay, so that's the end of the Politico piece. It doesn't tell us a great deal about what's going on except for some discussion of the timeline, but that's important. So now you know kind of where the highest temperature days of the week are going to fall, somewhere around Thursday. And today being Tuesday, that leaves us today and tomorrow to fling mud and or poo at one another. and blame one another, that is to say the various wings of the Democratic Party, for not adhering to the terms of the deal. In the end, it's beginning to, I don't know, the usual historical pattern here is that they ask the progressives to appeal to their better nature and recognize that there is some help for some people to be had, and to jump at the chance and capitalize on it and put it in the bag, and then we'll go back to work on the big thing. Now, it's also historically been the case that the big thing then falls apart, leaving the progressives without the benefit of the bargain, unless, of course, you count the help that the progressives were able to offer people, a much smaller amount and a much more highly targeted group, and a much more highly targeted, that is to say, much more frequently residents of the districts of the moderate to centrists who have blown up the deal. They'll get the benefit of the bargain, whereas the constituency of the progressives basically stands there holding the bag. That's been the historical pattern, and they're looking to break it. We'll see whether they have organized themselves differently this time around. And really, honestly, by all indications, Pramila Jayapal has done an excellent job in holding the caucus together, in giving the caucus voice and purpose in a way that previous leaders, it's not that they haven't tried, but it's just rarely been taken seriously. That also was a historical problem, having those votes hang together at critical moments when there was help in the offing. It's an awfully difficult thing to do for a progressive, to turn down help for at least part of their constituency or even someone else's constituency. It's tough.
Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning. I have good news to report. Many more listeners like you are making critical contributions that keep our show on the air. It makes good sense, of course, and patreon.com, Patreon.com, makes it simple. Now you can make easy, secure, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. Maybe you'd like to thank us for helping keep you sane during the Trump era. Maybe you're looking forward to in-depth explanations of what's going on in the Biden administration. Whatever it is that keeps you listening, we need your help to keep bringing it to you. And hey, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running with those options too. Thanks again, everyone, for all of your support. We literally could not do this without you.
All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Net Roots Radio. What else can we talk about today? Well, there's an awful lot happening, of course. Let's see. Here's some discussion happening on Twitter. I wonder if this will enlighten us at all about the previous story. How far back does this thread go? Let's see. Beginning with, who's quoting who? Beginning with Jake Sherman, I guess, into a conversation that eventually involves NYC Southpaw and Greg Sargent. So I'm tracing the provenance of this thing back. Let's see. Jake Sherman saying, few quick items before I head down to the Democratic caucus meeting. This was about 26 minutes ago that he tweeted this. 1, Dem leadership desperately wants Biden to get involved with Sinema and Manchin. This seems to be happening per the great Seung-Min Kim. All right. Let's see. With Sinema going to the White House today. Screen grab included here that says, one thing we heard Monday night from multiple sources in Pelosi's leadership circle is that the speaker can't do this alone. Pelosi will need Biden and Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer to push Manchin and Sinema to negotiate on a top-line number, especially Biden. Without that, Pelosi can't make significant headway with progressives, since that number will drive many of the policy decisions inside the legislative package itself. Pelosi alluded to this dynamic during her remarks before House Democrats on Monday. We're still waiting for the number because you cannot prove the design on the legislation without the number, Pelosi said to the caucus, and the president is working on that piece. He's working on that piece. Okay. Sherman follows that up with, here's an honest question progressives are wrestling with. Why would they trust Sinema and Manchin? Progressives see the infrastructure bill as their only insurance policy. And, well, the first commenter on the thread here says, well, they would be correct. And they would be. That's been historically the pattern. So let's see. In response to Jake Sherman's commenting here, our Punchbowl News guy, NYC Southpaw, commenting that I think this is the question progressives were wrestling with when the two-track approach got rolling earlier this year. Yes, it was. And they framed their strategy to address it. Right now, I pick up a broad vein of cynicism about whether Sinema and Manchin care if the infrastructure bill gets passed at all. That's a possibility, too. And then the tweet that caught my eye was Greg Sargent's response to Southpaw, saying the right answer to this, I think, is to make it all about Manchin and Sinema. If House centrists want the infrastructure bill to pass, BIF, right, they should help persuade Manchin and Sinema to persuasively endorse a good reconciliation framework and to allay all doubts that they'll support it later. Well, that's a great plan. That's really what they should be doing. I'm not being facetious about the efficacy of such a plan. The problem is it possible to convince Manchin and Sinema to play along, given the doubts expressed, I think, correctly by Southpaw, that, well, maybe they don't care if the infrastructure bill is passed, especially if it doesn't pass and if it doesn't pass because they won't commit to anything that gives progressives any hope whatsoever that there's a path to passage for reconciliation, and then they therefore withhold their votes on the infrastructure bill, Manchin and Sinema will say, I wanted the infrastructure bill to pass, but the progressives didn't. They blew it up. And it'll be awfully hard to convince the public otherwise. But on the other hand, progressives, the members of the Progressive Caucus may not be interested in convincing anyone in, West Virginia or Arizona that it's really Manchin and Sinema's fault. They're just interested in convincing their constituencies that there really wasn't that much in the deal for them without the inclusion of reconciliation. And, infrastructure is nice, but were they building bridges in their district? Were they repairing roadways in their district? In some cases, yes, but in many cases, no. Not that interesting. And not really a kitchen table issue in their districts. It's supposedly a kitchen table issue elsewhere. The people are sitting down for dinner saying, pass the potatoes, but before you do, God damn it, do I want some infrastructure. I don't know where those homes are, but there are certainly places where people think, infrastructure, everybody's for that. Why can't we agree and do that? Well, there are reasons, and they've been explained here. We'll see whether, anybody takes the lesson. All right, many other things to discuss here, many other tracks to go on, and some of them are very interesting. Procedurally speaking, Marjorie Taylor Greene is an idiot, and she doesn't know what she's doing, and yesterday she made an idiot of herself. Unfortunately, the C-SPAN cameras didn't capture what must actually have happened here. The only video I've been able to see is Marjorie Taylor Greene explaining herself later on in the day, probably during 1-minute speeches at the outset of, the conduct of business for the day on Monday. But she is still up to her old one trick. Now that they kicked her off all of her committees, her favorite thing to do is whenever she gets around to it, she wanders over to the House floor and makes a motion to adjourn, because there's nothing for her to do, certainly, and she doesn't want anybody else to be able to do anything either. So, whatever her excuse is, all the things that we're doing in this Congress are terrible. She's got a very weird accent. I should listen to it more to try to figure out what it is. It brings to mind the Sarah Palin accent, but that doesn't make any particular sense. She doesn't have a Georgian accent, per se, but she's got a very distinctive one. And maybe I'll open up the video and just play it because you deserve to be irritated in the morning, I think. And hearing her voice is a sure way of doing it. But anyway, what happens is she comes down to the floor as usual, and she makes a motion to adjourn. And it's superfluous. Even Republicans don't really care about the motion to adjourn, but they treat it like a roll call for the day, almost like the journal votes used to be. And Republicans all vote to adjourn because there's not going to be enough votes to adjourn, so nothing bad is going to happen. But you hang together and have a tribal moment. And all the Democrats vote not to adjourn because they control the agenda on the floor. There are things to do. They don't really want to adjourn. They want to get business done. There's more Democrats than there are Republicans. Lo and behold, they don't adjourn. She's never been successful with that. She's never going to be successful with that. It doesn't matter whether it's somebody else who's smarter and knows more about how to do it. It won't be successful. But Marjorie Taylor Greene has dedicated herself to being the idiot who offers the hopeless motion every day. Yesterday, I guess she must have, I don't know whether she had additional urgency because she was, more angry about what was going on this week than usual, or she just was up early this morning, or she didn't have any idea what time things were really going to happen. I'm not certain. But anyway, according to Raw Story, she showed up on the House floor to make her motion to adjourn, but she did so apparently during the first couple seconds of activity on the House floor. At which point, the House isn't actually in session to do business yet. She just wanted to make sure that she got her motion offered as soon as possible and that they would vote on adjourning before they did anything. So she actually, I guess, literally jumped the gun and tried to make her motion to adjourn before they had even had the opening prayer for the day, which, yes, it's bizarre that they do this, but they do this. And they open each day's session with a prayer offered by the chaplain or sometimes a guest chaplain. In this case, the regular chaplain, who, as it turns out, is a Rear Admiral in the Navy, by the way, this woman who is House Chaplain. And they follow the prayer with the recitation of the Pledge of Allegiance, which also superfluous, whatever. But this is the pageantry we add to things. And, well, why can't you dispense with the prayer? Why can't you dispense with the Pledge of Allegiance before every effing day's session in the House of Representatives and the Senate? And the answer is because, oh my God, imagine what the public would do to you if you were the one objecting to a daily prayer and the Pledge of Allegiance. What are you, an atheist, Hitler, commie, socialist, whatever other, epithet you could think of to throw in there? You would be viciously attacked, right? Right, of course you would, because Republicans would viciously attack you. The minute a Democrat says, why are we praying every day for this stuff? First of all, shouldn't there be separation of church and state? And and it's okay because it's no particular church involved in leading the daily prayer. And when Democrats are in charge, they are very literal about that. And they say, the excuse we give for going along with this stupid pageantry is, well, we recognize all religions. It's no threat to establishing a state religion because we have Muslim imams come and offer an anodyne, non-sectarian prayer. We have, Jewish rabbis. We have Catholic priests. We have, various Protestant pastors. It's pretty well represented out there in terms of bringing in the different religions. When Democrats do it, when Republicans do it, it tends to be the opposite. And they tend to bring people who sometimes will offer prayers that are pretty overtly exclusive. But that's republicanism. Anyway, either way, so long as Democrats worry about being attacked for being anti-prayer, they're trying to take God out of our government. Well, there's actually pretty good reason to do that. But no, we, generally acquiesce. That just we'll have a fight about. It's a dumb fight to have. Let's fight about things of substance instead. So we'll have the prayer. How about the Pledge of Allegiance? Well, duh. Everybody here it used to be the case that everyone who was serving in Congress, I guess post-Civil War, was pretty much assumed to be loyal to the United States of America, and you really didn't need them to affirm it over and over again every day. Now, of course, there's Marjorie Taylor Greene, and I'm not entirely positive, and there's plenty of others. Paul Gosar, Lauren Boebert, all the people you would name as having been connected with the insurrection. Jim Jordan, many others, whose loyalties you might in fact question, but whose loyalties never really are questioned in the main, in mainstream press, because they are adherents to the, rigid adherence to the stupid pageantry. They would never object to the offering of the daily prayer and the recitation of the Pledge of Allegiance because they're such great American patriots. Only liberal, commie, socialist, Marxist, Hitler, Obama people, I remember when they used to put the two of them together, would object to something like the recitation of the Pledge of Allegiance. All of which is getting around, of course, to the story that, the Raw Story headline on it is Marjorie Taylor Greene makes wild attempt to stop daily prayer and Pledge of Allegiance on House floor. David Edwards writes the article that goes along with it. By the way, of course, taking Oliver Willis's constant messaging to heart, the obvious headline for this and every other press outlet should have been Marjorie Taylor Greene opposes daily prayer and Pledge of Allegiance, vows to stop it. She's now anti-Pledge of Allegiance. You bet. Absolutely. And had any Democrat done this would have been, the right-wing media sphere would have been aflame with this attack. But what have you been hearing about it? Nothing, because nobody's talking about it, because Democrats don't do this stuff, blah, 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 blah. Here's a story as Raw Story, who's got every interest in the world in reporting it that way. This is how they put it. Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene complained on Monday that House rules prevented her from making a motion to adjourn before the daily prayer and Pledge of Allegiance had been completed. I guess she tried to interrupt it. And I went to look for the video of the prayer and pledge being offered on C-SPAN, and I don't know whether she's actually trying to do this or whatever, or just her microphone is off, but you cannot tell that anything is going on. Except because I knew this story had happened already, there was a little bit of weirdness to the staff and the dais staff and whichever member it was who was in the chair in the morning. I didn't recognize him. And the member who was there to offer the Pledge of Allegiance, to lead the Pledge of Allegiance, when they came in and got set to bring the House into session, there was a weird moment where whoever was supposed to be occupying the chair went up to the speaker's rostrum, went up to the chair rather, and got ready to gavel in. But then somebody else came in, and I think it might have been the member whose job it was going to be to offer the Pledge of Allegiance, came in and then quickly waved to him come here, come off the dais and back outside into the speaker's lobby. I need to talk to you about something. And I wonder whether the discussion at that point was, I heard Marjorie, idiot Greene, is going to try and disrupt this thing, and we need to be aware of that. And the floor staff just says, just plow right through it. We'll have her microphone off. No one will hear her. Just pretend nothing's going on. I think that might be what happened. Anyway. So Greene revealed the grievances in a speech on the House floor. So the speech, which I, thought I would call up and just give you a taste of how awful her voice is about how she tried to offer this motion to adjourn, but they said, you can't do it because we haven't had the pledge or the prayer yet. And what a stupid rule, and only in Washington, D.C. would we have such a stupid rule that prevents me from offering a stupid motion that's going to fail. It wasn't even a good complaint. And it was much less dramatic than what would have been really interesting was having the cameras on her and having the sound on of her, screaming from the floor, no, stop praying. You got to listen to me. I wanted to hear that, but you couldn't. There was no video of that. All right. So, I guess I could go and play part of the speech. You can't get sued for it because it's public domain stuff. It's just boring. It's about a minute of her rambling about it because I think that's all they gave her. I think it was 1 minute. Oh, It was, okay. I see from the C-SPAN Chiron here that she was in fact speaking during general speeches at the close of business usually, when members can claim 5 minutes for what they used to call special orders, but I guess here now they label general speeches. But it's only about a minute of her complaining. Let's see what's up.
You see, this government is failing the American people, and the more votes we take this week are going to continue to fail the American people.
Now, I don't know what kind of accent that is, but American people. But anyway, general nonsense. We're going to have a vote on a infrastructure bill and, $3.5 trillion worth of social spending. And that, for Marjorie Trader Greene, that's it. We're going to fail the American people and we're going to continue. So basically her argument is we're not doing anything good, nothing I like. So why don't we adjourn? So she continues.
And this is why I walked in here this morning to make a motion to adjourn. But then I was told I couldn't make a motion to adjourn because we hadn't said the prayer or the pledge.
Yeah, well, you can't make any motion for anything, whether to adjourn or otherwise, because there's no session yet. It's pretty easy to understand. But not Marjorie. She doesn't get it. And regular folks back home don't get it either. Oh, my God. Anyway, so on she goes.
It's very unfortunate.
Very
we should make a motion to
extremely
adjourn because Congress should
terrible.
stop.
Yeah.
Congress
should
is
stop.
the one ruining the lives of the American people, not helping them like they claim to do. You see, it's our federal government's role to keep our borders strong, safe, and secure. It's our government's role to never abandon Americans in a foreign country ruled by radical Islamic terrorists
border,
that would like to kill them just because they're Americans.
Yada, yada.
It's
We
not
got to
our
stop
federal
praying because of
government's job
Afghanistan.
to pass a bill or consider even making a law. Abortion up until
Abortion.
full term and then call it women's health care.
Sure, whatever.
This is too much.
You get the idea. Anyway, so there's no real explanation of what actually happened here. But for that, we'll read the raw story thing. So there's an excerpt from her speech, which was meaningless. But Green cited Afghanistan, abortion, and the border as reasons for adjourning the House of Representatives. Yada, yada. Is there actually any more in there? No. All right. So it's really just a reporting on what is in her stupid speech, which I guess I would play for you, but it's just a waste of time. There's another 30 seconds. But nothing else new comes to light. But what really would have been more interesting is a view of her trying to talk over, like, the staff and the member in the chair, saying, I want to talk, it's my turn to talk. It's not your turn to talk. We haven't started the session yet. Well, I want to adjourn. Well, there's nothing to adjourn because the thing hasn't started yet. The more you talk, the longer it's going to take to get around to your motion to adjourn, because all we're trying to do here is give you something to adjourn. You're going to lose, but you can't adjourn it if it doesn't start. But of course, her interest is in disrupting. And there was no press conference to disrupt today, or yesterday, so she did this instead. That was the other story of Marjorie Trader Greene and her bag of tricks from last week. Did that happen over the weekend? I feel like I found out about it over the weekend. Anyway, where I guess it must have been at the end of the week, like Friday maybe, and Democrats passed a bill. I paid zero attention to it because I just didn't have the bandwidth for it, but they passed a bill that purported, anyway, if it passes and is signed, we'll see how effective it is, but it purports to, it's a good try, to protect a federalized right to abortion, access to abortion, as a pushback on the Texas craziness and their bounty bill. Anyway, so they had a press op, a photo op on the stairs of the house on the east front, the big steps that you see going up in the I'm Just a Bill, sitting here on Capitol Hill, right, and on the steps, he's lamenting his fate, those steps. They went out there and they had their picture taken, all the Dems who supported the thing, and I don't know, I guess in your newspaper you're supposed to see a picture about that when you read the very interesting article about the piece of legislation that the House passed. And hooray. Okay, so pictures are being taken. But Marjorie Taylor Greene, I guess with nothing else to do, decided she was going to stand out there on the steps off to the side and shout things to the press who were, chiefly photographers and not really there to take any notes about what Marjorie Taylor Greene was saying. There might be some regular beat reporters there trying to get a comment about this or some other thing out of some particular member. Anyone will answer. But she stood there and they're taking their pictures. Nobody's saying anything because it's a photo op. But, a staffer, I'm sure, has introduced her. All right, everybody over here for pictures. Again, this is the group of Democratic legislators who voted for the bill, HR, whatever, to protect the women's right to access to abortion because of the threat that's being posed by the Texas bill and other bills under consideration around the country in the various states. So step right up, everybody take your pictures. And Marjorie Taylor Greene is now standing off to the side and saying, you're murdering babies. Try being Christians for once, and blah, blah. And you might have seen that Democratic Representative Debbie Dingell from Michigan decided to yell back at her like, how about, being civil and just saying, this really has nothing to do with you. Why don't you F off and get away? You don't want to vote for the bill, fine. You don't want to be in the picture, fine. Just go away. No one wants to hear your screaming. And they get into a shouting match about things, and it gets videotaped and circulated on Twitter. By the way, this is like the, seventh, maybe, member of Congress that Marjorie Taylor Greene has had a public screaming match / blow-up / stalking incident with. All women, by the way. She was later also, shouted at or answered by one of the men in the Democratic caucus who was out there for the photo op. But I guess, theirs didn't really devolve into the screaming match the same way it did with Dingell. She only screams at and gets really confrontational with women. I guess deep down, maybe that's one of the good parts of the training of her, evangelical background is maybe she's afraid to. Yeah, you wouldn't think so. But anyway, she seems to be more averse to getting into confrontations with men. So I guess surround her with Democratic men. And then she'll maybe stay quieter. I have no idea. Anyway, so she's up to her usual tricks about that. I thought that was somewhat interesting. And we'll see what she's up to today. Another vapid Republican woman, not that they all are, but one who is, Kristi Noem, now in the news, getting herself in trouble out in South Dakota. I guess opposition researchers probably hard at work figuring maybe we can preemptively destroy her presidential bid. Of course, they might be Trump's opposition workers. I don't really know. Story gets picked up either way by Stephen Groves at the AP. As daughter sought state license, Noem summoned agency head. What's going on here? She said, I need a new head. Mine is empty. Bring me one, head agency. That isn't it. Just days after a South Dakota agency moved to deny her daughter's application to become a certified real estate appraiser, Governor Kristi Noem summoned to her office the state employee who ran the agency, the woman's direct supervisor, and the state labor secretary. Noem's daughter attended too. Noem's daughter goes by the name of Cassidy with a K. Cassidy Peters. She's married to a Mr. Peters, as it happens. She was at the time 26 years old, and she did ultimately obtain the certification in November of 2020, 4 months after the meeting at her mother's office. A week after that, after the meeting, that is, the labor secretary called the agency head, Sherry Bren, to demand her retirement, according to an age discrimination complaint that Bren filed against the department. Bren, who is 70, ultimately left that job this past March after the state paid her $200,000 to withdraw the complaint. But it also means she can't tell us about it. Exactly what transpired at the July 27th, 2020 meeting in the governor's office isn't clear. Noem declined an interview request. Her office hasn't answered any questions. The AP, however, they say, is disparaging the governor's daughter in order to attack the governor politically. That's not what's happening. No wonder Americans trust in the media is at an all-time low, blah, blah, blah. This is according to spokesman Ian Fury. which is an apt, if possibly fake, name. Still, government ethics experts who reviewed the series of events at the AP's request said Noem's decision to include her daughter in the meeting created a conflict of interest regardless of what was discussed. That's not even really the chief complaint I have about the whole thing. But one additional complaint I'll add is, this accusation, the AP is disparaging the governor's daughter. Not at all. They're disparaging the governor. They have nothing at all to say about the governor's daughter. They don't even say that she should or shouldn't have been entitled to the certification she wanted. They leave that up to the various players to comment on. The AP is disparaging the governor because the governor is a corrupt idiot, and this is evidence of that. Has nothing to do with the governor's daughter, and they don't defend themselves against that at all. But whatever. So here's the story. While Peters, the daughter, was applying for the certification, Noem should have recused herself from discussions on the agency, especially any that would apply to her daughter's application, said Richard Painter, professor at the University of Minnesota's law school, who was the chief ethics lawyer for the former President George W. Bush. So you know he's right, because ethics and George W. Bush, it's even the Republicans say this. Yes, it's clearly a conflict of interest and abuse of power for the benefit of a family member. That's the basic story of it, and that's the truth behind it too. There's lots of detail. I don't know if we'll spend any time on it because Noem is still a relatively minor player in the pageant, and I don't think that this will, knock her out of the race for president or anything. But by the way, in case you're wondering about it, there's nothing overt in the AP's reporting. They really seem to go out of their way. Maybe this is the play here from Noem's office. They go out of their way not to disparage the daughter. There's no reporting that says that she wasn't, qualified in any way to get the certification. Just that, apparently the people who make the decision said, she could use a few more months of training. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro Morning Show. Here on Networks Radio, that's where we live. Okay. If you want the basics of it, maybe we can do this rest of this story pretty quickly, just so, I don't know. Who knows? Maybe it blows up into a major thing. Peters, the daughter, began working as a state registered appraiser, an entry-level job, in 2016. She worked under the supervision of a certified appraiser to get the experience necessary to apply for her own residential appraiser certification. Not an easy hurdle, they note. Applicants must show they can perform appraisals to national standards, putting to use 200 hours of classroom education and months of experience. While trainees make as little as $10 an hour, we should talk to Christy Noem's daughter about the sufficiency of the $10 an hour entry-level pay. She wanted to. Everyone wants to move up in a job, but I would have been interested before this to ask her, outside of the context of her being the governor's daughter, but to use that against her later, of course. What do you make of this whole the pay level for entry-level appraisers? I mean, maybe it's okay in South Dakota. I'm sure $10 an hour goes farther in South Dakota than Philadelphia, say, but I'm pretty sure they'd still be unhappy on $10 an hour even in South Dakota. But I would be interested in that. But that's not the story. They make very little money, that's true. But certified residential appraisers can launch their own businesses and make more than $50,000 a year. So, in September of 2019, Peters applied to become a certified residential appraiser, but in late July of 2020, the appraiser certification program moved to deny the license, according to a July 27th letter from Peters' supervisor that was obtained by the AP. Certification is denied when an applicant's work samples don't meet minimum compliance with national standards, according to the agency's upgrade procedures. I don't know how hard it is to meet national standards. I don't know anything about that. But, okay, whatever. Her supervisor says, well, she's missing the mark on these things. And it sounds like, there's no indication that they're trying to block her. And there's no indication, in fact, anywhere in the story that any of the supervisors know that she's the governor's daughter, though that may be well known. I have no idea. Maybe we're being naive about these things. But there's no indication that there's, a permanent roadblock here. Anyway, Bren, who had directed the appraiser certification program for 3 decades, told the AP that she received a text on July 26th from her supervisor telling her to be at the governor's office the next morning, ready to discuss, quote, appraiser certification procedures. Obviously, an everyday, huge and pressing concern for the governor of South Dakota. How are we certifying appraisers for private, residential property in this state? I've got to know. There's coronavirus. We're in the top 10 in terms of numbers of infections. People are dying left and right. We can't have fireworks at Mount Rushmore, even under Trump. God damn it. All the important stuff. Our National Guard has been dispatched to the border in Texas. By the way, what's the deal with how we certify our appraisers in this state? But she wants to know. Well, it's pretty obvious, I guess, right away what's happening. Besides Noem and Peters, Bren said the meeting included Labor Secretary Marcia Holtman, Bren's supervisor, the governor's general counsel, and participating by telephone, Noem's chief of staff and a lawyer from the state's Department of Labor and Regulation. Bren remembered it lasting close to an hour and including questions from Noem on how certification works, which is sort of homework, and you could find that out before having a meeting. After consulting with her attorney, Bren declined to discuss with the AP further meeting details, including whether Peters' upgrade was discussed. It was, I'm sure. The settlement of her age discrimination complaint includes a clause barring her from disparaging state officials, so that's why she didn't talk. However, Bren did confirm that at the meeting she was presented with a letter from Peters' supervisor, Christine Julfs, Juelfs, who wrote that she disagreed with the denial and charged that Peters had run up against an, quote, inefficient process. So there's no accusation that there's political bias or that they've targeted her because she's the daughter of the governor. It's that the process is inefficient. Okay. Therefore, of course, bring in everybody and the chief of staff and the Department of Labor and Regulation lawyer and the governor's general counsel and Bren's direct supervisor. All of these people have to be there because, there's inefficiencies. And you want to work these things out, but maybe at a conference table at the, let's say, Department of Labor and Regulation. No. Governor's office now. Okay. All right, so here's what else Julfs has to say. In the past week, I'm now imagining this in Marjorie Taylor Greene / Sarah Palin voice. In the past week, I was notified that my trainee, state registered appraiser Cassidy Peters, with a K and a heart for the I, was denied upgrade of her license to state certified residential appraiser. This came as quite a shock to myself. This is great. Isn't this great, ready? This came as quite a shock to myself. Allow myself to introduce the shock to myself, as she has represented the knowledge and skills necessary. Okay, demonstrated, evidenced, represented. Okay. Can I just say that I don't know if I can take your word for whether or not anybody has represented the knowledge and skills necessary, given that represented would really not be the correct... Well, okay. So you're not a writer. Julfs' letter blasted the application evaluation for lacking timeliness and professionalism, and said the examiner reviewing Peters' work had acted unprofessional when conversing with Cassidy. Okay. I mean, you know what else is unprofessional? Something coming as quite a shock to myself, and representing the knowledge and skills, and acted unprofessionally. It's an adverb, for Christ's sake. All right. Well, anyway, Peters agreed with the criticism in a statement to AP. What do you know? She was also agreed with the inefficiency of the process. My upgrade to become a certified residential appraiser was very lengthy, and I was expected to navigate through many obstacles from the very beginning, she said. I'm glad I have it now, and that I have the privilege to serve my clients in South Dakota. All right. Bren declined to discuss the certification of any individual appraisers, including Peters. However, speaking broadly about the agency, she said she hoped to help the applicants succeed while making sure they met federal requirements. You also want to be fair and consistent and treat all your appraisers the same, she said. I hope they were doing that. Labor Secretary Holtman, in response to questions from the AP, declined to delve into details of Peters' application or the discrepancy between Julf's letter, which said the upgrade had been denied, and department records, which showed the denial was not ultimately issued. Cassidy Peters went through the same process as other appraisers. There was no denial, Holtman said in a statement. Peters completed the requirements to become licensed, and she was subsequently certified in November. Bren's troubles began to mount almost immediately after Peters' November 25th certification. One day earlier, Holtman had called Bren to discuss concerns about the appraiser certification program, according to Bren's age discrimination complaint. On December 1st, the complaint alleged Holtman called Bren to demand her retirement, saying she had shown an, quote, inability to change gears, whatever that means. Holtman told Bren that the phone call was to be kept a secret from her direct supervisor. That's a good one. To make it appear Bren's retirement was her choice, the complaint alleged. Over the ensuing weeks, Holtman did not yield in demanding a retirement date, even after Bren asked if there was any way she could keep her job. Emails obtained by the AP show. Bren filed an age discrimination complaint at the end of December and 3 months later received $200K in a settlement agreement to withdraw the complaint and leave her job. When asked about Bren, Holtman declined to discuss the specifics of personnel decisions. Mark Miller, the governor's current general counsel, said in a statement, neither party admitted fault and no agency affirmed her claim. The sideshow regarding Cassidy Peters speaks for itself, except I don't understand what it says. Fury, the governor's spokesman, cast the episode as an example of how Nome won't allow bureaucratic red tape to get in the way of South Dakota's sustained economic growth. This one real estate appraiser, who's her daughter, is the difference between yes and no on sustained economic growth. Having more quality appraisers in the market will help keep our housing market moving and home prices down. Yeah, sure. A few days before signing the agreement, Bren sent an email to industry colleagues expressing worry about the future of the program. I have been forced to retire by the Secretary of the Department of Labor and Regulation at the behest of the administration, she wrote. Then added, I want each of you to know that I have sincerely done everything possible to avoid this unfortunate circumstance. Cha-ching, $200,000 later. Okay, well, there you go. Now you know more than you ever wanted to know about Cassidy and how she's doing in her new job. But, you know, you never know when that's going to blow up into something. Let's see. Other fun stories that need sharing with you. Let's see. What's like really the most interesting one? Let's go over here. This seems like a fun one, just in terms of the ins and outs of politics. This was presented as a great puzzlement, but in fact, you'll see underlying all of it, it makes a great deal of sense, I think. But here's the funny headline: how an anti-Trump plotter in 2016 became his champion against Liz Cheney. And the answer is, I hate Liz Cheney because, what was her? It's Trump saying, I really, really strongly, very strongly hate Liz Cheney because she voted to impeach me for no reason, right? Okay, well, he's mad at Liz Cheney, wants her out, needs a Republican challenger to her for her congressional seat in Wyoming. There's 6 or 7 people in Wyoming. And, so they had to find somebody. So they found somebody. As it turns out, they were an ever-Trumper, briefly. But now they're always Trumper because Trump is going to endorse them. So it's a little bit of a weird thing. But it's not as weird as you think. Who is it? Her name is Harriet Hageman. So, hurry up. We all hate Harriet Hageman. All right. A Wyoming Republican is the former president's choice, Trump's choice, to take on his leading GOP critic. But 5 years ago, she tried to overturn his victory in the party's primary race. It's kind of funny in that way. Reed Epstein does the reporting, but I think you probably already see why it makes a certain amount of sense, right? Former President Donald J. Trump is leading an all-out war against Representative Liz Cheney of Wyoming because of her perceived lack of loyalty. After voting to impeach him, she became the voice of Republican opposition to his attempt to overturn the 2020 election. But his choice to replace her, Harriet Hageman, was not always a loyal soldier herself. She was part of the final Republican resistance to his ascent in 2016, backing doomed procedural measures at the party's national convention aimed at stripping him of the presidential nomination he had clinched 2 months earlier. Wow. Seems like a bad choice for him, don't you think? Maybe. Ms. Hageman worked with fellow supporters of Senator Ted Cruz of Texas. Blah. In a failed effort to force a vote on the convention floor between Mr. Trump and Mr. Cruz, regardless of the results of the primaries and caucuses held across America. Calling Mr. Trump the weakest candidate, Ms. Hageman attributed his rise to Democrats who she claimed had voted in Republican primaries. Not likely. Not a great insight there, Harriet. She condemned Mr. Trump as a bigoted candidate, that's a good one though, who would repel voters Republicans needed to win in a national election. And that was true. They lost those elections. So she was kind of right about that. But anyway, warning that the GOP would be saddled with, quote, somebody who is racist and xenophobic. Again, got to give you credit on that one. Ms. Hageman's years-long journey from never Trumpism to declaring him the best president of her lifetime is one of the most striking illustrations yet of the political elasticity demonstrated by both by ambitious Republicans in the Trump era and by the former president himself, who has relentlessly asserted his dominance over leaders of the party. Ms. Hageman is hardly the only Republican to vigorously oppose Trump and later back him when it proved politically advantageous. Mr. Cruz himself, as a matter of fact, the aforementioned Ted Cruz, and Senator Lindsey Graham of South Carolina, along with Ken Cuccinelli, who led the 2016 rebellion at the convention, all became enthusiastic Trump supporters once they were paid off with, position and support. None of them, however, have quite achieved Ms. Hageman's remarkable political transformation. I think they have, which has not been previously reported. 5 years ago, she was a passionate opponent of Mr. Trump who tried to stop him outside the normal electoral process. I'm hinting very strongly at why this makes more sense than it would appear on its face by emphasizing these things. She tried to stop him outside the normal election process. Now she is his champion in the Republican Party's marquee showdown over fealty to the former president. And why is Liz Cheney's fealty to the former president in question? Because she voted to impeach him for trying to, change the outcome and work outside the normal election process. You get the idea here? Ms. Cheney's vocal opposition to Mr. Trump has turned what might otherwise be a sleepy contest for a sleepy contest for a safely Republican Wyoming congressional seat into a high-profile test case of the former president's dominance over the party. His obsession with removing Ms. Cheney from office has derided her in at least 16 statements since March, including one on Thursday that contained a doctored photo combining her hair, body, and eyeglasses with former President George W. Bush's face. Ooh, burn, I guess. I mean, great. I don't care. Has overshadowed nearly all of his other political efforts aside from vying to overturn the results of the 2020 election. Again, vying to overturn the results of the 2020 election. It's going to be the most important House race in the country in 2022, Ms. Cheney said during a 60 Minutes interview broadcast on Sunday. It will be the one where people do have the opportunity to say, we want to stand for the Constitution. Okay, fine, great. For Ms. Hageman, joining forces with Mr. Trump to attack an old ally, that's interesting. The two Wyoming women were once so close. How close were they? They were once so close that Ms. Hageman served as an advisor, to Ms. Cheney's short-lived 2014 Senate campaign. It's like they're sisters. Except she's got a sister with whom she's also reconciled in the Sunday interview. Anyway, this presents an opportunity to accomplish something she has been unable to do without him, Trump, win a statewide race in Wyoming. Ms. Hageman has never spoken publicly about her effort to block Trump from the 2016 nomination. In a statement to the New York Times, she drew a tenuous connection between her actions and Ms. Cheney. I'd be interested to see what the spin is. I heard and believed the lies the Democrats and Liz Cheney's friends in the media were telling at the time, but that's ancient history, as I quickly realized that their allegations against President Trump were untrue, Ms. Hageman said. I tried to lead a rebellion on the floor of the Republican National Convention to overturn the results of the primary elections because, well, I heard lies from Liz Cheney's friends in the media, but now I understand that they were lies. He was the greatest president of my lifetime. Was. Oh, now you're in trouble. And I am proud to have been able to renominate him in 2020. I didn't even realize that was the case. And I'm proud to strongly support him today. No, you're not. Ms. Cheney, who declined to comment or be interviewed for this article, supported Trump's 2016 campaign. She endorsed him that May, and in October issued a statement reiterating her support after the release of the Access Hollywood recording in which Trump bragged about groping women. I forgot that. The daughter of a longtime Wyoming state legislator, Ms. Hageman, 58, built her career as a water and natural resources lawyer, fighting environmentalists and government regulations. Well, we should say, as a water and natural resources polluter, a lawyer for them. You know, she's not pro-water or natural resources. She's anti that stuff. She became known in Wyoming for her successful challenge of a Clinton-era prohibition on road construction on millions of acres of U.S. Forest Service land. I remember that. Not her involvement, but I remember that fight. In 2009, a headline in an environmentalist magazine called her the Wicked Witch of the West. Wow. Okay. In 2016, Ms. Hageman went to the Republican convention in Cleveland as a Cruz delegate after the Texas senator won Wyoming with 66% of the vote and 23 of the 25 delegates as the state's county conventions that March. She had been appointed by the Wyoming delegation to the National Convention's powerful Rules Committee. The big question facing the committee's members that year was how much say delegates should have in choosing the party's nominee. Usually a lot. Leading up to the convention, Hageman joined a small group of Republicans who organized the last-ditch effort to unbind delegates. They hoped to insert a conscience provision freeing delegates to vote for whomever they wanted, regardless of the results of the state primaries and caucuses, a move concocted by supporters of Mr. Cruz to instigate a convention floor fight. That summer, Hageman was a regular participant in conference calls plotting the last gasp opposition to Trump. Long after he had won enough delegates to clinch the nomination, she and other delegates, many of them social conservatives from the West loyal to Cruz, argued that Trump was a cancer on the party, which he is, chosen by liberal voters in the Democratic states, which he isn't, to undermine Republicans nationwide. Would have been a great plan. Not true. The Republican National Committee, working with the Trump campaign, did all it could to squash the rebellion. To vote to free the delegates at that time was considered a capital offense by the Trump campaign, except they didn't kill anybody for it, and didn't even really hold a grudge long enough. Just so long as it was anti-Cheney in the end, they were willing to go along with this thing. That, according to Steve Dupre, I don't know, then a Republican National Committee member from New Hampshire who was on the Rules Committee, it was clearly an attempt to deny him the nomination, which he had won fair and square, maybe. Reince Priebus, then the chair of the RNC, held long meetings with Mr. Cuccinelli and Rules Committee members who were seeking to unbind the delegates. Hageman, along with Senator Mike Lee of Utah, who was at the time the highest profile Rules Committee member involved in the Stop Trump movement, was among the attendees. It soon became clear the Trump team had peeled away enough support from Mr. Cuccinelli that the vote would not be close. Trump's allies forced a vote that would affirmatively declare delegates to be bound by the results of their state's nominating contests. When it was time to vote, 87 stood in favor of binding the delegates. Only 12, including Hageman and Lee, voted in opposition, far short of the 28 needed to put the question of unbinding delegates to a vote of the full convention, which would have been a potentially embarrassing spectacle for Mr. Trump. Though the fight was over, Hageman participated in meetings over the next few days in which Cruz delegates discussed whether they had any remaining options to stop Trump. What else have we got? Did they think about storming the convention center with armed thugs to delay things? They may have. Mr. Trump, who endorsed Ms. Hageman this month, is aware of her support for Mr. Cruz in 2016, and during his interview with her this summer, before he made his decision, briefly touched on her role in the effort to stop Trump from claiming the nomination, according to a person familiar with their talks who spoke on the condition of anonymity because it was a lie. Because he was not authorized to discuss the endorsement process. Mr. Trump, who has taken particular pleasure in collecting the support of converted never-Trumpers, worked to clear the Wyoming field for Ms. Hageman, sending a fleet of aides to work for her and asking other candidates to drop out of the race after he made the endorsement. The former president has for months focused on ousting Ms. Cheney. His aides and his son, Donald Trump Jr., tried unsuccessfully in March to change Wyoming's elections law in a way that would have hurt the Congresswoman's re-election prospects. Hageman, Trump said in his endorsement, is all in for America first. It took years for Ms. Hageman to become an unabashed Trump supporter. When she ran for Wyoming governor in 2018, Trump endorsed Foster Freese, now dead, by the way, a billionaire conservative donor who had backed Trump's 2016 effort. Freese, who died in May, finished second to Mark Gordon, who was the state treasurer and is now Wyoming's governor. Hageman placed third. Hageman was known for her penchant to attack fellow Republican candidates in debates. She did not invoke Mr. Trump or his campaign themes in her television advertising. She was talking about state issues, not anything federal, said Deemer True, a former Wyoming State Senate president who also served as chairman of the Wyoming Republican Party. Well, guess what? The national crap is what worked, I guess. In 2020, Hageman ran for office again, seeking one of Wyoming's two posts as members of the Republican National Committee. This time, she aligned herself with Trump against Barbara Cuban, a former congresswoman backed by party moderates. Hageman prevailed at a virtual state party convention by 152 votes to 105. Not a stellar showing, but whatever. So she's a Republican National Committee woman now. Congratulations to this former anti-Trumper. In case you still missed how come it really isn't all that puzzling why an anti-Trump plotter in 2016 would become a Trump champion against Liz Cheney. One, anything to get rid of Liz Cheney in Trump world. And two, they have a lot in common. Both of them are perfectly willing to overthrow the presumably legitimate outcome of the voters' expression of their preferences in order to get their way. Trump, of course, January 6th and ever since, and actually for the several months prior to January 6th as well, and Hageman in 2016. The overwhelming, I guess, majority of the contests having proven that Trump was the choice of activist Republicans. She actually, went to the Republican convention with the idea in mind of, forget all the people who voted. I want something different. Can't we do it my way? So they have an awful lot in common, and I guess it probably makes a lot of sense that they would eventually find one another. And we'll see how it works. I don't know if I want to root for Liz Cheney or anything, but you know how that conundrum goes. We don't need to discuss that part. Anyway, I thought that was some interesting background, reminding us of just how ridiculous it is that Ted Cruz and Mike Lee and all the rest of them could ever become Trump supporters. And remember when Mike Lee was such a constitutionalist and all this stuff? Oh, got to protect the Constitution at all costs. And it doesn't matter which side is attacking it. I'm going to stand up for it. Right. Not guilty, right? In both votes. Good job there, champ. Anyway, let's see. Other stories to share with you, and there are plenty, but there's a break coming. Some more interesting news from ProPublica, but you know how long it takes to share some of that stuff. Maybe we can get back around. I don't know. We'll see what happens, what I skim over during the break. Any other things that we really, really should make an effort to include? Or can we turn back to more Facebook bashing? Maybe we can do that with the last segment of today's Tuesday show. We'll see what grabs our attention over the break, and I'll look back over comments or other inputs from Twitter and otherwise. But yes, there's even more to add to the Facebook bashing. This, again, also shared by Patrick Snyder with me, so I feel like we really need to get back around to that story. He's being very insistent, I think properly so, that this is something we need to pay attention to. It is a big story and has the potential to become a really huge part of the political narrative in this country, and maybe we can help it become part of the political narrative. It's a terrible, terrible thing. Facebook sucks. Absolutely something we should be looking to excise from the fabric of American life, if you ask me. But, they know they're too ingrained. Anyway, we'll be right back.
Hi, everyone. It's me, Gil. Minimal contributor to content, but regular contributor to funding for Kagro in the morning. Let's change things up from David's so very tired plea for your contributions with a plea of my own. If you want to add your voice to the show, do it. Record your own segment using your favorite recording device and send it to David. Read an article and give your opinion. Write your own essay and read that. The sky's the limit. Well, not really. Try to keep it relatively short so David doesn't have to stress about cutting it and hurting your feelings. Join the hallowed ranks of Greg Dworkin and Joan McCarter and be part of this somewhat witty deep dive into political topics with unnecessary censoring. Lend your voice to the show by sending it to kagrox@gmail.com. KAGROX@gmail.com.
All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show. You know where we are. It's Netroots Radio, and we're here on it. So, okay, we've gotten around to the same content of the reintroduction. Okay, definitely something I want to mention here before we pick which tangent to go on for the last segment. Sarah Binder is out there and talking about the options for the debt ceiling vote. And the birds are talking about it outside the window as well, so that's good news. Well, let's put it on the record here so that we know what's being considered. She is saying that the obvious solution, obvious to me, who does not have to wrangle 50 Senate Democratic votes, the obvious solution to the political hurdles of addressing the debt limit and the extreme consequences of failing to do so is, she says, nuking Rule 22 for measures related to suspending the debt limit. That is, of course, the nuking is the hint for you if you lost track of what she was saying when she went to Rules 22. Filibuster. That's the rule that sets up the cloture procedure. That's the closest you can come to a filibuster rule, per se. But yeah, so it's basically she's saying, what about a limited nuclear strike carving out an exception from the filibuster for votes on the debt ceiling? Which, you can have a carve out for anything. And it's not the most radical carve out that's already under discussion. And there's some basis for thinking that might have more theoretical support among institutionalists and parliamentarians, given that, why was the debt ceiling included among the 3 or 4 things that you can clearly use reconciliation for? And the answer, I think, is that those who crafted the Budget Act and the reconciliation process as a part of it clearly said, well, that's one of those votes that really can't be screwed around with. And you can't hold it hostage you shouldn't be able to hold it hostage with a filibuster for precisely that reason. It's so important that you really can't afford to enable gaming this and brinksmanship with the debt ceiling. So it stands to reason that you might also simply want to say there's just no filibuster allowed on it, whether you do it by including it in reconciliation or have a carve out elsewhere. Anyway, so she then says, well, what are the upsides on all of this? And she says, politically, Dems would avoid a vote that specifies how high the ceiling is raised. That is, either temporarily or permanently, for that matter, suspending the debt ceiling. There's two ways of dealing with this problem. Three. One would be suspending the debt ceiling, which is, I guess, what they've done the last couple times in a row, where they just say the current number designated as the debt ceiling is still the same number. We just are now suspending the effect of the law. All right. So the debt is still limited to X number, which we've surpassed, but it's okay that we surpassed it because it's suspended for now. The other way of dealing with it would be to say, all right, we're raising the debt ceiling from the number that it was last time it was changed to this new higher number, which we have not yet exceeded. That's a possibility. But that hasn't been used in the last couple of go-rounds allegedly because Democrats are afraid to put that number out there. Well, we want to raise the debt ceiling to $15 trillion or whatever it is. And then they're afraid that they'll be like, oh my gosh, there's television ads against us from Republicans, and there would be, saying they voted to raise the debt limit to $15 trillion. Now, and I guess it's just less dramatic to say they voted to ignore the debt limit even though it was $4 trillion or something, whatever the number is. I don't know. It's probably like in the double digits by far by now, I guss, because we'll run $1 trillion deficits in single years at this point. Anyway, so those are two ways of dealing with it. Either put a number on it or simply suspend it. And the third way, of course, would be to say we abolish the debt limit. But so far, no willingness to do that. So, one of the upsides of doing a limited nuclear strike and just saying there's just no filibusters allowed, 50 votes, a majority vote is sufficient to invoke cloture on a bill dealing with the debt ceiling. So that would mean politically, Dems avoid a vote that specifies how high the ceiling is raised, making it slightly harder for the Republicans to weaponize the vote against them. Institutionally, Dems avoid the uncertainties and time sink of addressing the debt limit through reconciliation. That is somewhat helpful. Reconciliation process for dealing with bills, it's almost like Votorama. There's a time limit on it and all, but it is a real drag to get through that time on the floor. Just the floor consideration, not to mention how much time is sunk into trying to mark up the legislation in the various committees. So, Dems would most likely, for starters, have to amend the budget resolution. The other day we saw Greg Sargent suggesting, after having talked to one expert or another, that he was suggesting that yes, they should turn around and put the debt ceiling question into the reconciliation bill. And I thought, well, yeah, but there were no reconciliation instructions in the budget for the debt ceiling. I mean, I found that to be foolish, and I said well ahead of time, and for many, many years, apparently I dug up some quotes that I guess for 10 years, back in 2011, I was saying, you should be dealing with the budget ceiling or the debt ceiling in reconciliation, everybody. Just a reminder that you can do that. You should take advantage of it. Literally for 10 years. But anyway, yes, I thought it was weird that they didn't avail themselves of that opportunity, just in case. But anyway, Greg said he had heard from the experts that you could go back and pass an amendment to the budget. You can amend the budget because it's not a law. It hasn't been signed by the president or anything. It's a congressional document. You can call it back up and amend it and add instructions. And then you got to go through the lengthy process of having the budget committee and any other, I guess the budget committee could do it by itself, but maybe who knows what other committees have to touch the thing and then mark it up and then send it to budget, and budget then merges it into the overall reconciliation bill. But even that is not that easy, as it turns out. Sarah says here, Dems would have to amend the budget resolution to get it started. And then she goes on to say, as best as I can tell from CRS, the last time Congress did this as a standalone measure was 1977, when the Congressional Budget Act was a toddler, as she puts it, and I was in middle school. Her, not me. But uncertainties abound. Would the parliamentarian, judge this particular amendment kosher under the Congressional Budget Act? That's a question. Would the reconciliation bill spun out from the resolution, the budget resolution, secure all privileges afforded to normal reconciliation bills? I don't know why it wouldn't, but I guess it's a question. And could Dems suspend rather than raise the ceiling? That is to say, there was some question about if you were to use reconciliation. I guess the permission is to raise the debt ceiling under reconciliation, not to suspend the debt ceiling. That's not specifically authorized under the Congressional Budget Act, but raising it is. They could try and see what the parliamentarian says, but apparently no formal precedent on the question. And if Dems found they needed 60 votes to leap over any hurdles, would any of the Republicans lend a vote? The bottom line with the debt limit change through reconciliation is that with X date looming on October 18th, I guess the end of the Treasury's ability to stretch things out, everything has to go right, including a parliamentarian who offers favorable guidance to the Democrats' gambit. True, she finishes up here, nuking Rule 22 to simply allow the majority to end debate on a debt limit measure is not cost-free. True. But would threatening to go nuclear push the Senate Republicans to back down and vote for cloture? She says, well, I doubt it, actually. But arguably, both parties would benefit now or in the future from such a filibuster carve-out. And I agree, they probably would. I think it would be an interesting gambit. I don't know if I've evaluated it for efficacy versus using reconciliation. But she makes good points, obviously, about the reconciliation problems. But it might be interesting to go that route and dare the Republicans to oppose it, and they probably would. They would say, fine, I think it works for us to have the Democrats up against the wall and have them start nuking parts of the filibuster rules now, because it creates a crisis for them. The crisis that it would create, of course, is you got right now Manchin and Sinema, who have very foolishly painted themselves in the corner because they didn't anticipate something like this, painted themselves in the corner saying, we will never vote to change the filibuster rules. We're not going to do it. We love the filibuster. Even though both Manchin and Sinema, I think, are on record as noting how disastrous failing to deal with the debt ceiling can be and how risky it is for Republicans to stand in the way. So then they would say, all right, well, you can do it if you Democrats can get your act together and convince Manchin and Sinema to go ahead and vote for a Rule 22 carve-out for raising the debt ceiling. Good, I guess, whatever. We have avoided the economic collapse. That's always a good thing. And you've made hypocrites out of Manchin and Sinema, which is fine by us. We don't care either. And I also think it might be a good thing to show them, there were circumstances beyond your imagining. I know it was difficult to imagine there was anything beyond the comprehension of Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema, but as it turns out, there really was. I thought so early on in the beginning of the organization of this Congress that there was a possibility that the Republicans would block and filibuster the organizing resolutions, including that which would have the measure which put Joe Manchin at the top of the Natural Resources Committee as chair. But they jumped out of the way of that one. But that was good and strategic for them, because otherwise Joe Manchin would have realized, there really are some things I personally care enough about to say, the filibuster shouldn't stand in the way of this thing. And once you get used to that, maybe you can be convinced. So that would be really interesting to see the fate of everything hinge on the question of whether or not you can make Joe Manchin eat his words about changing the filibuster in order to do something that even he thinks is essential, but with which Republicans will provide no help. And at that point, it might be in strategic interest of the Republicans to provide that help so that he doesn't have to swallow his words swallow his pride, vote to nuke or partially nuke the filibuster, and then find out, hey, I survived that, and it really went pretty well, and my constituents actually think it was a pretty good thing. Maybe I could be convinced to nuke the filibuster either entirely or in small bits again, this time to save the economic agenda, and maybe later to save the voting rights agenda. It really wasn't all that painful after all, and Republicans probably don't want him to figure that out. So it might be in their interest at that point to say, well, maybe we can let, the Louisiana senators redeem themselves for having voted last night, as was the case, to block everything, including, of course, aid for recovering from Hurricane Ida, which is pretty amazing. Just yesterday, of course, I woke up to the news that, probably the Louisiana senators are persuadable. They might vote in favor of things going forward so that they can get that Hurricane Ida relief. But it turns out, no, they weren't interested. They might want to redeem themselves, and maybe they would be the votes that got released in order to prevent Joe Manchin from finding out how comfortable and easy it really is to change the filibuster rules. So that's a very interesting strategic play, which we might see played out in the coming days. So I thank Sarah for thinking about that one. And let's see. I mentioned to you that there was more Facebook terribleness to go into. This time, Patrick Snyder sends me the tweet thread of Cory Doctorow, who has this to say about what's going on in Facebook. There's a lot, but I like the way he dives right in. Facebook is a rotten company. Rotten from the top down. I like this. Its founder, board, and top executives are sociopaths and monsters. Not Rob Monster from Epic, but just regular monsters. Committers of non-hyperbolic, no-fooling crimes against humanity. They lie, they cheat, they steal. They are some of history's greatest villains. I realize now this would have even more impact if we had finished all the other stories about why Facebook is so disgusting on the air. But maybe you read some of them off the air. There was a lot more to them. But let me just go on with this one, because this is really sounding good. They lie, they cheat, and they steal, and they're some of history's greatest villains. Awesome. If you'd like an unrolled version of this thread to read or share this, I shouldn't be reading aloud, right? This is a waste of time. Here's a link, blah, blah, blah. Okay. Because Facebook is a terrible company run by terrible people, it periodically erupts in ghastly scandal. Sometimes whistleblowers or reporters reveal historic crimes, including, but not limited to, deliberately helping to foment genocide. That was one of the other parts of the no good, very bad week that they had last week, also pointed out to me, but we didn't get to share. But yes, slaughter, I understand, in Myanmar, and I don't remember. I didn't read I actually had to skip the article about the genocide to get to all the rest of the things that we have going on here. Sometimes the scandals are contemporary. Either Facebook blithely announces it's going to do something terrible, or we learn of some terrible thing underway from leaks or investigations. Thanks to a history of anti-competitive mergers with WhatsApp, with Instagram, with one I've never heard of, Onavo, O-N-A-V-O, and more, based on fraudulent promises to antitrust regulators, Facebook has grown to nearly 3 billion users, except Facebook doesn't have users, really. It has hostages. And he links here to an article in the EFF.org organization, Electronic Frontier Foundation, the privacy people, that he wrote back in July of 2020. By the way, headline, "Don't Believe Proven Liars, the Absolute Minimum Standard of Prudence in Merger Scrutiny." But he goes on to explain even more. As Facebook's own internal memos show, the company doesn't just buy up competitors so users have nowhere to flee to. It also engineers in high switching costs to make it more painful to leave the system, which I think he's backing up with even more of his writing. Facebook's secret war on switching costs, also at EFF. For example, Facebook's internal memos show that the manager for its photo products set out to seduce users into entrusting Facebook with their family photos, because that way quitting Facebook would mean abandoning your memories of your kids and departed grandparents, etc. Everybody hates Facebook, especially Facebook users. The point of high switching costs, after all, is to increase the pain of leaving so that Facebook can dole out more abuse to its users without fearing that they'll quit the whole enterprise. Facebook's mission is to increase the size of the sandwich that they can force you to eat before you walk away. But they're not mere sadists. Crap sandwiches have a business model. The more hostages they take, the more they can extract from advertisers, their true customers. The polite term for what Facebook has is a two-sided market, selling advertisers to users and users to advertisers. The technical term is a monopoly and a monopsony. A monopsony is a market with a single buyer. Like healthcare was supposed to be. A colloquial term for it, racket. A scam, bezel, a blight. Facebook gouges advertisers on rate cards, then lies about the reach of its ads, like when it lied about the popularity of video, evincing a media-wide pivot to video. You remember that? That bankrupted dozens of news and entertainment sites. They really still haven't been held to account for that, by the way. Facebook didn't set out to destroy journalism by price-fixing ads, lying to advertisers and media outlets. Facebook set out to acquire a monopoly and extract monopoly rents from advertisers and publishers, with a pathological indifference to how these frauds would harm others. Having shown a willingness to destroy journalists and media outlets to extract a few more billion for its shareholders, Facebook has attracted a lot of enemies in the media. If you're a whistleblower with a story to tell, there's a journalist whose editor will allocate the resources to report your story in depth. The combination of a rotten company and a lot of pissed off journalists produces a lot of bad ink for the company, and it all is coming out in the last week or two. But the fact remains that Facebook has a vast pool of hostages, billions of them, and it gets to decide what they see, when, and how. I used to joke with my human rights activist friends that the best use for Facebook was showing people how and why to leave Facebook. Facebook's response, of course, was predictable. As, these folks from the New York Times write, Facebook's Project Amplify, which we did read a little bit about, is a Zuckerberg-led initiative to systematically promote positive coverage of Facebook and its founder, including articles that originate with Facebook itself. That is, Facebook staffers are charged with writing puff pieces about how great the company is, and Facebook's algorithm will push these ahead of reporting by actual journalists who present detailed, factual, multi-sourced accounts of the company's fraudulent and depraved conduct. Project Amplify marks a pivot from Facebook's long-standing policy of issuing insincere apologies for its scandals. Company sources told the reporters that everyone figured out these don't convince anyone, so the company turned to pushing happy talk quack speak instead. One of the leaders of this project is Alex Schultz, a 14-year company veteran who was named Chief Marketing Officer last year, but the major impetus comes from Zuck himself, one of the most hated men on the planet. Amplify is just one of Facebook's strategies for distorting the discourse about itself. In July, it neutered CrowdTangle, the widely used analytics tool that showed that Facebook's top posts were in fact unhinged far-right disinformation and conspiracies. And Facebook has declared all-out legal warfare, accompanied by disinformation campaign, to kill Ad Observer, an NYU project that tracks paid political disinformation on the platform. By shutting down CrowdTangle and Ad Observer, Facebook hopes to control the academic findings about the company's role in disinformation, hate, and harassment. The company runs its own research portal where academics are expected to access data about the platform, but as with the journalists who report on it, Facebook has heaped abuse on the academics who research it. Its portal data was bad, leaving PhD and master's theses at risk of retraction, mid-dissertation researchers have been set back to square one. That'll piss them off pretty good. In retrospect, Facebook's decision to game its own algorithm to push pro-company quackspeak seems inevitable. It's not just that no one believes the company's apologies anymore, if they ever did. It's that the company seems incapable of hiring competent spin doctors. Take, if you will, the Wall Street Journal's blockbuster Facebook Files, a series of reports detailing the company's willingness to harm children, commit fraud, and allow millions of favored, powerful people to violate its rules with impunity. Maybe we should take that. Facebook's response was genuinely pathetic. In a perfunctory blog post, its top flack, the widely despised British politician Nick Clegg, paid millions to front FBI on the global stage, vilified the Wall Street Journal's reporting without producing any factual rebuttals. It's the kind of ham-fisted policy advocacy that Facebook is infamous for. Who can forget the absolute, again, we gotta edit, crap show in India over its Internet Basics program when it bribed telecoms, I guess, to exempt Facebook and the services it handpicked from their data caps. This net nutricidal maneuver, falsely billed as a way to bring the internet to poor people, something it absolutely does not do, was the subject of a consultation by India's telco regulators. Facebook pushed deceptive alerts to millions of Indian users, tricking them into sending a flood of form letters to the regulator, urging it to leave Internet Basics intact. But whoever drafted the form letter didn't bother to check whether it addressed any of the questions the regulator was consulting on. That made these millions of letters non-responsive to the consultation, so the regulator ignored them. Facebook lost. It's almost as though people who are good at fighting policy battles don't want to work for Facebook, and the only talent they can attract are the kinds of opportunistic blunderers that no one takes seriously and everyone hates. Weird, that. And that's the end of the thread. So that was pretty scathing, true, and lots of good links to dig into there to find out exactly what it is he is talking about. But as I mentioned, lots of new stuff that adds to Facebook's woes. One I haven't gotten to yet, and of course we have barely any time left in the show today, but that I wanted to mention, because I had mentioned about ProPublica and their lengthy investigations. This is an interesting one too, not having to do so much, well, maybe not with corporate governance, but just to put it on your radar. Their article, Facebook grew Marketplace, the Facebook Marketplace, to 1 billion users. Now, scammers are using it to target people around the world. How nice. Craig Silverman, A.C. Thompson, and Peter Elkin reported this on the 22nd. Give you a flavor of it on our way out the door today. ProPublica identified thousands of marketplace listings and profiles that broke the company's rules, revealing how Facebook failed to safeguard users. It's just too hard to police these rules, so they just don't. And if you get ripped off, you get ripped off. If it's under Facebook's auspices, what can you do? Well, I'll give you one quick taste of the type of anecdote, because we really are close to out of time. For years, Carmen Alfonsi relied upon Facebook Marketplace to buy and sell used pool tables for his Michigan billiards business. He banked a steady stream of income from the widely popular online bazaar. But this July, Alfonsi's Facebook account was hacked and used to post roughly 100 scam listings for cell phones and vehicles. The marketplace posts directed buyers to contact an email address controlled by the scammers. When customers were left empty-handed, they sent enraged messages to Alfonsi by phone and by Facebook Messenger, as you might expect. Alfonsi repeatedly contacted Facebook to warn that his account had been hijacked by fraudsters. Instead of fixing the problem, the social media giant banned him from using Marketplace, at one point removing his profile from its platform. Now Alfonsi carries a gun in his own home. Well, he probably was doing that anyway. But he says he's concerned that an angry marketplace customer might show up at his front door. I'm thinking I'm in trouble and someone's going to come to my house and kick my ass, Alfonsi said. Wow. Facebook's marketplace is unquestionably a business success. It hit 1 billion users a month this spring, and the company recently told investors that it's one of its most promising new sources of revenue. That growth has been built in part on the company's assurances about the safety of its platform, but just not for any individual users. It's safe for them, and that's all I guess investors ever care about. Sounds like a really interesting approach to more of the evil being perpetrated by Facebook. But for now, we have to leave it aside because it's time to turn things over to Justice Putnam for the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. What's he got on tap? We got a few minutes, seconds. Let's talk about it. After the sham Arizona audit turned out to be a bust, Trump and the GOP have tripled down on dangerous new conspiracies to destroy our democracy. An Arizona judge blocked the state's laws banning schools and local mask mandates, and California has become the first state to require hourly wages in the garment industry.
NetworksRadio.com. You have been listening to Kagro in the Morning with David Waldman.
More to come, of course. The Biden administration having moved for some protections for the Dreamers to protect them from deportation. That's good news. Internationally, the British government put scores of soldiers on standby to help ease fuel supply problems caused by a shortage of truck drivers. Maybe they shouldn't have Brexited after all. Next.